the end of episode 3 of House of the Dragon, Daemon goes on a suicide mission to get rid of the crab feeder after years of fighting in the Stepstones. He feigns surrender, then attacks the soldiers of the crab feeder while fighting breaks out around them. Corlys Velaryon and his men, with Laenor Velaryon on his dragon Sea Smoke, fight the remainder of the Triarchy troops while Daemon seeks out Craghas Drahar, the crab feeder himself, hiding in the gloomy caves. Shortly after, Daemon drags out half a mutilated, disease-ridden corpse and tosses it onto the sands before his men. Pan to the rogue prince, with the crab feeder's blood dripping all over him. What in the Greyscale is going on here? It was mentioned several times that Craghas Drahar had Greyscale, and we saw his red, raw, and scaled skin several times. Much like the Phantom of the Opera in his mask, his men generally stayed away from him and all of his disease. Looking back over the past couple of years of wearing masks and gloves, and if we've learned anything about social distancing, I think we can all agree that getting covered in someone's blood-borne pathogens is a surefire way to get their disease. Daemon has been shot by arrows and has open wounds all over his body, making the opportunity for exposure even greater. So today, we have to talk about this. Was Daemon Targaryen infected with Greyscale by the crab feeder? So the Targaryens are not like normal men, and they are not affected by the diseases of normal men either. This seems to be connected to the dragon riders specifically. They are blood of the dragon. They even have what is called the doctrine of exceptionalism, which basically says they're not like other men because of their dragons, and this gives them power to marry within their family to preserve their bloodline. For example, in A Dance with Dragons, there is a plague outside the walls of Meereen, and Daenerys Targaryen goes out amongst the sick people. Though Ser Jorah tells her this is a bad idea, she tells him she's blood of the dragon and she will not be afflicted, which she's not. She even has memories of never getting sick as a child. However, Greyscale may be a caveat to this, as it has actually affected Targaryens in the past. The old King Jaehaerys had a daughter, Maegelle, who was not a dragon rider and became a septa in Old Town. She cared for the children there with Greyscale, believing her dragon blood would protect her from the disease, which it did for a time, but eventually she did contract the disease and died of it. Now, was this because she was not a dragon rider and therefore her health may be more vulnerable? We don't know. However, I do believe our attention was drawn to the daughters of Jaehaerys in episode 3 as another hint to this. Greyscale has a swift-moving cousin called the Grey Plague, which actually started out as a curse called down by a prince of the Rhoynar. This was long ago in history, and the Rhoynish were fighting the Valyrians and their dragons, who were wiping out the river folk. Prince Garen called a curse up from the river, which was the Grey Plague, and it killed many of the Valyrian dragon riders by turning their skin to stone at a swift rate. What is important to note is that if you survive a bout of Greyscale, you cannot contract the Grey Plague. There have been other outbreaks of the Grey Plague, once in Old Town when Pycelle was a child, and another in Pentos, which claimed thousands, including the wife of Magister Illyrio Mopatis. His wife Sarah is suspected to be of the Blackfyre line, which is a bastard offshoot of the Targaryens, so she may also be dragon-blooded, but not a dragon rider. Illyrio keeps her stone hands in memory of his beloved wife, and what is very notable is that it was Illyrio who gave Daenerys her dragon eggs, which later hatched into Drogon, Viserion, and Rhaegal. Was Illyrio privy to Aegon's prophecy? Well, that's a rabbit hole for another day. In the show Game of Thrones, we were introduced to Greyscale by both Shireen Baratheon and Jorah Mormont. Shireen was one of those rare instances where the disease had been quote-unquote cured, although the wildlings don't believe it was cured at all, but just lying dormant. They actually euthanize their people if afflicted by the disease rather than risk it spreading. Jorah contracted the disease while traveling on the River Rhoyne, and Samwell Tarly was somehow easily able to cure him of it in one of the worst twists that D&D made on Game of Thrones. Sam applied some ointment and scraped off the outer layer of infected skin, and tra-la-la, Jorah was good to go. Very unlikely. It is said that bathing in vinegar can lessen the effects of Greyscale or slow the disease. Many are sent away to live amongst the stone men until they perish. Greyscale can affect the mind and work its way from the inside out rather than from the outside in, and this is another thing I want us all to keep in mind. So coming back around to Daemon, who was covered in the crab feeder's infected blood, it seems very likely that concerns will arise amongst those around him, like Corlys and Laenor, that Daemon may be infected with this incredibly contagious disease. In scenes from the next episode, Daemon rolls into court with short hair and styling himself King of the Stepstones. So let's talk about this. As each episode has gone, I think we're going to get another time jump. In fact, in the books, it is 3 years later that Daemon goes back to court. Now, plenty of us get haircuts over the course of 3 years, but up until this point, Daemon has worn his hair long, and from the future shots we get, he will do so again. I think there's a big reason for all of this. Quarantine. Most likely, Daemon's men will quarantine him until they can be sure he did not contract Greyscale. And while vinegar baths seem like a luxury that can be found in Old Town, out in the Stepstones, they'll have to get a little more creative. There will be no maester or bathtub or delicate curettage. No, it will be scourging by dragonfire. Recall Viserys' comment to a very pregnant Aemma in the tepid bathtub. Don't they know dragons like heat? Daemon and Aemma were portrayed as two sides of the same coin in that episode, and I believe this was another clue to Daemon's future. In A Game of Thrones, Daenerys walks into Khal Drogo's burning funeral pyre to transform into the Mother of Dragons. What was actually quite different in the show than the books is the fact that all of Daenerys' beautiful white Targaryen hair was burned off in the fire, and she has to regrow her luscious locks. I believe we're going to get an homage to this in the form of Daemon's grayscale scourging, and when he shows up to court 3 years later, his hair is growing back, but still short. Daemon and Caraxes are extremely well bonded to one another, and Caraxes feels it when Daemon is hit by an arrow, roaring and flying away to protect his rider. If Daemon is infected with the disease, Caraxes will do whatever he can to protect and heal his rider. So I'm actually here for it. I think it could be a really crazy and cool scene. Daemon and Caraxes somehow cleansing and scourging away this disease in dragonfire, displaying another cure to this disease and another form of protection from the dragons. If you want to learn more about my thoughts on Greyscale and what I think it actually represents in A Song of Ice and Fire, I've made a series of videos on the subject on another channel of mine, which I will link below. I think the Grey Plague itself is connected to the North and the Starks and the Long Night, and in House of the Dragon we are getting many hints to this idea. There's a constant contrasting to the Targaryens and the North, or the Targaryens versus Greyscale. It is roaring in our faces like Caraxes. I even believe the opening scene of episode 3 was another homage to the Long Night, with Daemon and Caraxes fighting through the hellish fires in the darkness against the crab feeder and his scaly countenance. But what do you all think? Does Daemon have Greyscale? Will we see a better version of its cure by Caraxes? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and be sure to hit the thumbs up if you liked this video, and subscribe to the channel for more on House of the Dragon, Raised by Wolves, Rings of Power, and all of our favorite nerdy shows. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye!